You can start the recording.
Got it.
Welcome to tonight's virtual Civil War presentation brought to you by civilwartalk.com. Thanks for joining us. Our guest tonight is Meg Groeling, author of First Fallen, The Life of Colonel Elmer Ellsworth, the North's first Civil War hero, which will be released by Zouave Beatty very soon. This series of presentations is brought to you by civilwartalk.com, the American Civil War discussion forum. We're happy to be able to bring these presentations to you all via the live virtual platform, and we hope that everyone will become a member of Civil War Talk. If you're not already, we'll be providing some membership information later on and hope you'll become part of our community.
Our guest tonight is Meg Groeling. She's a regular contributor to the blog Emerging Civil War, exploring subjects beyond the battlefield, such as personalities, politics, and practices that affected the men who did the fighting. A writer, teacher, and curriculum developer since 1987, she has taught at both the elementary and middle school levels for more than 30 years. She graduated from California State University, Long Beach, with a BA in liberal studies and has been involved in continuing education for her entire career. Meg received a master's degree from the American Public University, majoring in military history with a Civil War emphasis. Zouave Beatty published her first book, The Aftermath of Battle, The Burial of the Civil War Dead, in the fall of 2015 as part of the Emerging Civil War series. Tonight, Ms. Groeling will discuss her latest work, First Fallen, The Life of Colonel Elmer Ellsworth, the North's first Civil War hero, and that will be released soon by Zouave Beatty. Welcome. Please join me in welcoming Meg Groeling.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. It's certainly my pleasure. And this is my first of what I'm hoping is many opportunities to talk to people about Elmer Ellsworth. We're going to look at some slides here. Okay, we did him. There we go. Okay, so this is the cover to my book. And go ahead and do the next. Okay, this is our man. And Colonel Ellsworth, as you can see, died very young. He was 24, and he was the first Union officer killed in the American Civil War. Most Civil War people have heard about Elmer Ellsworth, but they don't know a lot about him. Usually they know that he was killed in Alexandria, killed, in some people's opinion, stealing a flag from the top of the Marshall House Hotel in Alexandria. And some people argue that it's wrong to say he was killed in the Civil War because it wasn't a battle. It was barely even a skirmish. But there's a lot more to Elmer Ellsworth than just how he died. And knowing all of this about Elmer Ellsworth makes you really appreciate the beginning of the war, the militia movement. And I am of the opinion that to truly understand Abraham Lincoln, you need to understand his relationship with Elmer Ellsworth as well. So I'm here to tell you a lot more. I'm also here to sort of do some myth busting. Elmer Ellsworth tried to tell people, including John Hay, Lincoln's one of Lincoln's secretaries, that he came from this terrible, impoverished background and, was a child of poverty. And of course, that was, in my opinion, proven to be untrue. Of course, he had parents, and he did not grow up in poverty. His father's name was Ephraim Elmer, and so Elmer was named for his father, but decided he would flip the names around so he wouldn't get confused with his father. And his mother's Phoebe Ellsworth, and a lot of people spell her name differently, but she signed it Phebe. So that's what I stuck with. And the fact that these pictures were taken, they're individual shots, they were taken in the 1850s. And, you know, that was not an inexpensive thing to do. So they certainly figured that their family was worth photographing. So that's one indication that they weren't as poor as Elmer liked to pretend that they were. Elmer Ellsworth's dad did lose his job in 1837. He was a tailor, and in the, you know, sort of the Great Panic of 1837, people did not have money to buy handmade suits, and that he made bespoke individual garments. So that didn't stop him at all. He learned how to butcher meat and began a new career as a butcher. And butchers didn't always work from a butcher shop. Sometimes they had a wagon that they drove around, and you made an appointment with the butcher to come. You know, the butcher's coming, he's gonna, you know, kill the cow and butcher the cow, and then he would take whatever you had promised, including his fee and some meat, and take off again. So butchers traveled from farm to farm at that point. But Ephraim Ellsworth always worked. When you go back and look at the tax rolls, he always paid his taxes. He always owed taxes, always worked, and he always owned his own property. And Mrs. Ellsworth, Phoebe Ellsworth, Elmer used to say, oh, she ran a boarding house. Well, that wasn't true either. She was one of 8 kids, and every so often somebody would need a place to, for a son to live while they were getting their feet on the ground, and it was getting crowded at home. So they were always welcome in the Ellsworths' household, and shared their food at the table, and got a room with them, and probably paid a little money, but she in no way ran a boarding house. She helped out her family. The next slide, this was referred to as the Ellsworth's low brow cottage because of the 2 windows on the second story, which looks kind of like eyebrows. And not only did they own substantial homes, now they did not own mansions, but they owned nice substantial homes. They owned the land that was surrounding that. They owned farm animals. They were fairly self-sufficient. They were not rich, but they certainly were not poor. I guess we'd call them, working class, middle class. One of the interesting things is that one of the people the Ellsworths lived next to was a very wealthy banker in Mechanicville, New York, upstate New York. And the Ellsworths boys, Charlie and Elmer, played with the kids next door, who were very wealthy. And they had such a good relationship with this family that when Ellsworth was killed, it was the husband in the family that took Mr. and Mrs. Ellsworth down the Hudson and stayed with them so they could pick up Elmer's remains and get them back up the river for burial. But you can kind of see that it's not, it's not a shack. Ellsworth, a short guy in a funny uniform, always. He'd been interested in the military for as long as anybody knew, and drew pictures as a little guy about the military, and was related to someone who had served in the George Washington's, well, was it George Washington's? It was up there in Saratoga. I'm not a Rev War historian, but his grandfather served in that part of the Revolution, and he always volunteered to join the militia. The militia at that point in time had fallen into sort of disrepair. They needed an upgrade from what they were in Washington's time, when they and before, when the local militia was what kept you away, you kept marauding Indians away from you and helped protect the town. They now were at the point where they showed up for parades and march for the 4th of July, and help to marry and bury each other, and that was about it. Most people didn't even have a gun, or if they had a gun, the guns didn't match. They were just whatever flintlock was hanging around their house that they brought to the meeting. And Elmer Ellsworth was very, very interested in militias. He had a militia group of 12 to 14-year-olds when he was about 14, and they were called the Black Plumed Riflemen. And he was always marching his friends around and getting them in trouble for performing military escapades around town. He left home when he was 16. He started working on the train between Troy, New York and Albany, New York. And he sold newspapers and met people and talked to people. And he was very handsome. He was very personable. This is another thing that I think gives lie to his I'm a a child of poverty. He had no trouble whatsoever moving within an upper stratum of society. So he ended up getting a job in New York City, selling cloth, and then was transferred to another store in New York City, which sold cloth, and he didn't like it as well. So he began to work for some engineers. He drew beautifully, and it doesn't say what he did, but since he had no real engineering background, several people have suggested that probably what he did was do the drawing for the engineers. And this group left New York City and went to we need to go back. Went to Chicago, and one of the things that was happening at that time was that young men in the North were leaving home, and as they came to places like Chicago, there were they got rooms in boarding houses, and I'm sure you've heard the expression room and board, or lunch at the bar, that kind of thing. These guys had to figure out where to get their hair cut, where to get new clothes, how to eat, and exercise was really important to them. So he ended up joining the YMCA. He learned how to fence, and from the man with whom from whom he learned to fence, who had served as a doctor in the Crimean War, he also learned the famous Zouave drill, which was a little different than anything that was going on in the military. He was in Chicago for a while. He and a friend joined the Chicago Cadets, which was kind of a down on their luck militia group. And the longer he stayed, the more famous they got. And he seemed to have a real knack for being able to get these militia groups to kind of get their act together. He worked from Illinois to Wisconsin, drilling cadet units. And one of the ones, the one in Chicago, won a national prize in a drill contest. And he offered to challenge any drill team in the United States because he felt like he didn't really get much of a run for his money at that point, but no one responded. So in response to that, he created the Chicago Zouave Cadets. There we go. And these guys became famous. They started out with about 80 members of young men from Chicago, and whittled it down to the best 50 or 60. and they presented a drill team performance based on the Zouave handbook for the Zouave drill handbook, which is quite a bit different than what Americans had seen. And they drilled and practiced for almost a year. And he had that challenge out there. No one responded. And finally, he decided, no, this isn't going to work. I'm going to have to, meet them where they are. And he arranged for a 20-city tour all over the Northwest. They became, for that time, incredibly famous. They were rock stars. They were all over the newspapers. Every time they would come into town, the girls would swoon. I mean, these were handsome young men, and he didn't charge anything for his performances and invited everybody to come. The performances have been described as sort of Cirque du Soleil meets the Crimean War. There were opportunities to fire prone on the ground, fire running, fire from behind a wall. They marched in circles and squares and triangles and all of those things at once, and were very, very well received. He performed in front of President Buchanan, as well as, I say 20 other cities. Performed in front of President Buchanan on the grounds of the White House. And kind of a funny story was that he performed at West Point. And at West Point at that time, Hardee was teaching there, and Winfield Scott was there. And Scott and Hardee, had written the two drill books for the United States Army. And they did their Zouave drill. And as Elmer was pulling him off the field, he kind of heard Winfield Scott say, yeah, it's a fancy drill. I don't know how it would be, in real life. Well, Elmer was so mortified because his guys could do any drill. They've been trained in at least 3. And he brought them right back to the drill field and immediately did Hardee's drill and kind of turned them around, and immediately did Winfield Scott's drill. And they were all totally impressed everybody. They couldn't even believe how fabulous these guys were. John Hay actually in his own writings writes about how well known they were and how famous Ellsworth became once he kind of got going with the U.S. Zouave Cadets. And when he comes back to Chicago, where he's welcomed with open arms and everything, he then distributes the U.S. Zouave Cadets into a variety of militias and gives his officers to the governor of Illinois, along with what you'll see later, which is Ellsworth's plan for incorporating the militia into the United States Army, because he knows that there is a war coming and feels that America is not prepared for it at all. One of the wonderful things John Hay says, and you can really picture it in your mind, is that after the Zouave Cadets performed and then left, that behind the Zouave Cadets sprung up like 1,000 flickering candles, smaller groups of Zouave militias, and the older militias took stock of themselves and improved. And so everywhere he went, behind him, he left a better legacy for military preparedness. Well, now that he's famous and now he's drilling in Springfield, he meets Abraham Lincoln, and Abraham Lincoln is very impressed. He meets Lincoln because Lincoln's a politico, and Ellsworth has been hanging out with politicos for several years now. That was how he was able to get the cities to book his tours and pay any attention to him at all. So Ellsworth becomes best friends, not only with Lincoln, but with John Hay, George Nicolay, who Hay, Nicolay, and Ellsworth become really just an incredible friends. So you can show the next Zouave cadet. They had music written about them. John Hay again said he was the most talked about man in the country. Everybody knew who they were. Everybody knew what was going on. But now that they were back, the next thing that was going to take over the headlines was Abraham Lincoln's, was the Republican convention in Chicago at the Wigwam. And from that, Lincoln's 1860 campaign. And if you've never read about Lincoln's 1860 campaign or the movement to get Lincoln picked as the presidential candidate at the convention, it's the kind of reading where you just, a great glass of beer and a hot afternoon. It's great reading. This is a time, of course, early, there isn't even a war yet, and people are very patriotic and just excited about everything. So Elmer Ellsworth and John Hay are very good looking, and they agree with Abraham Lincoln that they will scour the Springfield area and give stump speeches for Lincoln. And the night of the election, they were with Lincoln. They walked to the polling place with Lincoln to vote with him. And they all stayed together as they waited for the results and celebrated. This is one of my favorite parts, is how they celebrated. We see now, the inaugural balls and all that kind of nonsense. In Springfield, just down the street from where the Lincolns lived, there was an ice cream parlor, and Mrs. Lincoln had called her friends and asked them to bring cookies and little sandwiches and come to the ice cream parlor, and they would all get together that evening. And if whether Lincoln won the election or not, they would all celebrate his effort. So Abraham Lincoln, arguably the best president the United States has ever had, celebrated his election in a small town ice cream parlor. I think, I don't know, I just love that. So I said before, no complete picture of Abraham Lincoln can be had without completely understanding Elmer Ellsworth, John Hay, and George Nicolay. They haven't been studied enough. Okay. So now during this time, the time between the election and when Abraham Lincoln leaves Springfield, I think there's another little guy there. Yeah, more Zouave cadets. It's the next one. Lincoln with no beard. John Hay and George Nicolay. There's they didn't have exactly pins, but they wore these sometimes around their neck, or sometimes with rope through or ribbon through, and then tied it onto a button. So it was a campaign badge. Okay, so this is what Elmer Ellsworth is doing while he's waiting for Lincoln to get ready to go from Springfield to Washington. He has created an act for the reorganization of the militia of Illinois, and he is getting ready to pass the bar exam for Illinois. And he presents this act to the legislature, the Illinois state legislature. So we have to remember Springfield, although similar to New York, not the largest town, is still the capital. And he talks about it, and the one in the picture is one that was printed up and handed out to the legislators. It was all a plan for the Illinois legislature for the reorganization of the state militia, as it says, so that when the war came, Illinois would be prepared. And by that, he means Illinois men are uniformed, Illinois men are equipped, Illinois men they have rifles, they are trained, they can drill and drill well, so that they are ready to go. This military preparedness is a huge interest of Ellsworth, and he's very upset that, you know, the North doesn't seem to be very militarily prepared. It had been a question as to whether Ellsworth had passed the bar exam. And one of the interesting things about taking 11 years, including getting a master's in the middle of it, to write a book is that things show up. And in Springfield, they had some rains, and they decided that they were going to go over all of these boxes and boxes of old forms and you know, get as many of them, get the mildew off as many of them as they could. And this was just a few years ago. And as they were looking, they found, oh, Clarence Darrow and Michelle and Barack Obama. And yes, Elmer Ellsworth signed. What you do in Illinois is you pass the bar, and then they offer you a law license, and you sign an acceptance of the law license. So his acceptance of the law license was found, was reclaimed from the elements, and we now know that he in fact did pass the bar in Illinois. So the Inaugural Express was how Lincoln decided he was going to get to from Springfield to Washington. And the Inaugural Express was not just one train, it was several trains. And they did everything they could. This is a reproduction of one of them. Did everything they could to have the most beautiful example of the power of steam and the glory of their little city that had now hooked an engine on. There were still some areas that they would be going through where the tracks were not the same size. So they had to try several different versions of the train, but the train itself was beautiful. And Ellsworth had asked, Lincoln asked Ellsworth to be on the Inaugural Express. And if anybody ever wanted to make a movie, the plot of the Lincoln assassination and the Inaugural Express trip, I think would make an incredible movie. It's a grand plot, wonderful characters, beautiful steam trains. And no longer is there any doubt that the plot was a fake plot. It was definitely a real plot. After several people's personal papers became available to the public, they definitely planned on killing Abraham Lincoln, president-elect, in Baltimore as he passed through on the train. This wasn't news. There was still talk about it before the train left. And Elmer Ellsworth's job was to guard Mrs. Lincoln and the boys as they went through Baltimore and on to Washington. His other job was to, as soon as they got to a city, he and several of the other Army officers got up, who are going to become even fancier Army officers in the Civil War. And Pope is one of them. They make sure that the city's safe. They make sure there are enough carriages to carry the entire presidential party to the waiting hotel, etc. So that's what happened. And then, of course, there he is. It's supposed to be a picture of Elmer Ellsworth standing next to Abraham Lincoln as he makes his farewell speech in Springfield, Illinois. Although the boys and Mrs. Lincoln were not with him. They picked him, caught up with him on the second stop. It was Mrs. Lincoln's birthday, and she didn't want to be on the train. She had a birthday party. So anyway, as he, you can go on now. Okay, this is Lincoln's first Secretary of War, Simon Cameron, who was a terrible Secretary of War and not an honest man. And one of the things that Lincoln had promised Elmer Ellsworth was that he could get a job in the army as a major of militias. Well, Lincoln was just woefully ignorant, as was Simon Cameron, as was Elmer Ellsworth, as to just how you actually got officer's rank in the United States Army. And as a matter of fact, Winfield Scott had already appointed Charles Stone of Ball's Bluff fame to organize the Capitol's defenses so that, you know, when they were getting ready for the inaugural. So all the militias in the area were already mustered. They were already assigned. It had already been taken care of. And there was no place for Elmer Ellsworth, and it was just ignorance on lots of people's parts. And Elmer backs out rather than cause any issues for Abraham Lincoln. And he kind of, go to the next one, kind of hangs around and, you know, he's got some ideas. He's working on things, you know, staying at the Willard Hotel. He goes almost every night to have dinner with the Lincolns. And at that time, Willie and Tad ended up with the measles. And sure enough, after playing with Willie and Tad for those days, Elmer Ellsworth ended up with the measles. And Elmer Ellsworth's brother had died of one of those odd versions of smallpox like variola, which obviously wasn't the virulent smallpox that wiped out everybody a couple of centuries before. But the spots on Elmer's face reminded him of his brother dying of smallpox. And Elmer, who I have to admit was a bit of a diva, thought he was going to die. He was pretty sure this was it. He was going to die of smallpox. So he barricades himself in Willard's Hotel. He doesn't want to talk to anybody. He's holed up at the hotel. And finally, John Hay and George Nicolay go up to the door and they pound on the door and, you know, Elmer, you've got to come out. You know, it's going to be okay. The boys have measles. It's just measles. Well, as we know, when you're an adult, measles aren't always that easy to deal with anyway. So Elmer was pretty ill. We go to the next one. Yeah, Willard's Hotel. This is the old Willard's Hotel. And this was where, pardon me, Elmer Ellsworth was sick. Go ahead. And while John Hay was mopping Ellsworth's brow, he says to John Hay, and this has been quoted several times, "I can only speak for myself. You know I have a great work to do, to which my life is pledged. Yet I could ask no better death than to fall next week before Sumter. You will find that patriotism is not dead, even if it sleeps." So the next week, Fort Sumter falls. And Ellsworth drags himself out of bed and decides he's going to go to New York City. You can go ahead. And the first thing he does is go to Lincoln and say, you know, I'm going to raise a regiment. I need some help. Lincoln writes a letter to Horace Greeley of the New York Tribune saying, you know, this guy's okay. He's on the level. He wants to raise a regiment, help him out. This was really important to Horace Greeley because of what had happened, you know, some things that had happened that he thought had destroyed his relationship with Lincoln during the convention at the wigwam. And this, of course, promised that, in fact, it was not destroyed. So go ahead. So Elmer Ellsworth claimed, "I want the New York firemen. There are no more effective men in the country, and none with whom I can do so much. They're sleeping on a volcano at Washington, and I want men who can go into a fight now." And he felt very strongly about this. He knew he did not have time to start from scratch and train men from scratch. He wanted men who could use what they knew on the job to, and we'll talk about this a little more later, to go into a fight and know how to handle themselves. Now, this is not a poster from Ellsworth. If you look down here, there are some addresses that are email addresses. But as you'll see in a couple of minutes, there are several gentlemen who, during the 125th anniversary of the Battle of Bull Run, recreated the New York firemen, and just, I know these guys, they're just terrific. They did everything they could. So from whatever it says underneath Colonel Noah Farnham, at that point, everything up is an authentic reproduction, but everything down, it would probably be a good idea not to volunteer for the fire Zouaves at this point. They've been, I think the last thing they did was at the 150th. So, all right. So anyway, Elmer starts talking, and in less than 2 days, with the help of the newspaper, with the help of the newsboys, with the help of everybody in New York, over 1,200 men and some women were recruited to leave New York as the 11th New York Infantry. And the reason he wanted firemen was because a fireman is trained to work not only independently, but as a group. So you go to a fire, and you have to look around as to what it is that needs to be done, figure out what you're going to do it, and as soon as you're through, turn around and figure out who you can help. And that's the kind of fighting they had been doing, and that's the kind of fighter Ellsworth wanted. The previous slide, there we go. Noah Farnham was the lieutenant colonel that took over the 11th New York after Ellsworth was killed, and he would never take the rank colonel because he felt so strongly about Ellsworth's leadership. And Major Krieger was one of the men who went back to New York to after First Bull Run to recruit the 2nd New York Fire Zouaves. And both of these men were leaders in their own fire companies. So he used the officers of the fire companies to officer the New York Fire Zouaves. And he also used the officers from his Zouave cadets, not just the officers, but he used them as drill instructors and just everything he could. And I see we have a question. And yes, there was great concern by the mayor that Ellsworth was going to take all the New York firemen, which is why, even though he started out with a couple of thousand, they whittled it down to 1,200. So yes, that was a concern. They, as a unit, were presented by the mayor and by actresses and famous people and politicos with a beautiful white silk flag. This is the one on the left is the original flag of the 11th New York Fire Zouaves. But the guys that I told you about, who the reenactors, they hand sewed, hand embroidered a reproduction of that flag. And it was at the sesquicentennial battle of First Bull Run. And that's the new flag. So you can see what an elegant and beautiful flag it was. And the 11th New York leaves on the Baltic. The Baltic is a very famous ship at this time. It's one of the ships that's been sent to Fort Sumter to reinforce. It shows up basically through 3/4 of the war, and then it sinks. But they were on the Baltic. They left New York Harbor to come to Washington. Okay. And when they got to Washington, as you can see, they were very anticipated. It describes their uniform. This unit under the command of dashing young Colonel Elmer Ellsworth. And it describes their uniform. It's one of the best drilled outfits in the city today, and is equipped with the new 58 caliber Sharps rifles, which it was not. And that was a point of contention between Elmer and the federal government. So they never did get them. Well, one of the problems with New York firemen is that the New York firemen were not a docile, calm group of men, even though Elmer Ellsworth did call them his pet lambs. That was more in sarcastically, and they were stationed or holed up, I guess you would say, in the Senate chambers, and they jumped from the top of the ceiling in the Senate chamber. They held mock legislature meetings. They did all kinds of things, and when they were out on the town, oh, everybody complained that those darn firemen were drunk and they were bothering women, and oh, everything was terrible, and how could we let this happen? Most of which was only partially true. They just had a high degree of visibility, and they were a little rough around the edges. But a fire actually broke out next to Willard's Hotel. And let me get my, this is a fire trumpet. And they asked Elmer Ellsworth to send in his New York firemen to actually put the fire out in the building next to Willard's. The first time the fire company in Washington had not been successful at it. And there's a story that the fire marshal of Washington is his nose is a little out of joint that these newcomers have shown up to, put out a fire that is his responsibility. And he's holding this fire trumpet, which this is the, there we go. That's where you talk into it. And that's where the noise comes out. And of course you can see that it's a pretty big, this is a brass trumpet. And that's how you give orders to firemen. And Elmer took it out of the hands of the fire marshal and said that since they weren't getting the job done, his men would. And they in fact did. And if you look at this this picture, and it's fairly easy to find if you have an interest in this, you can see some of the things that Elmer Ellsworth wanted from the firemen in their ability to work together, how they climb the walls, how they help each other up the walls. They perform as a unit, and then after they're through with that, they turn around and figure out, now where do I need to go? And they go and continue to do their job. And the fire got put out, and everything was good. And the fire Zouaves kind of went back into everybody's good graces again. They were once again welcomed as Ellsworth's pet lambs. But at about that time, they were moved to an area outside the city to await May 23rd. And Ellsworth was, as it says, a singularly attractive man. And there were people who made fun of him in the newspaper because, in fact, he had never been in the real army. He'd never shot a bullet. He'd never done any of those things. And one of the headlines was "Calico Colonels are in the ascendance," and kind of made fun of his leadership. Several people have said, oh, well, he couldn't afford to get into West Point. Well, West Point doesn't cost any money. He was too stupid to get into West Point. Well, that wasn't true at all. He was anything but stupid. He didn't have a good enough education to get into West Point. Well, West Point, even then, does exactly what all elite schools do. the summer before you report, you spend in summer school and they get you up to snuff. If your French isn't good enough, it becomes good enough. If your math isn't good enough, it gets a lot better. But the average age for going to West Point was about 18. And the rich family that lived next to the Ellsworths could have written letters to get Ellsworth accepted into West Point pretty easily. He chose not to. Ellsworth chose not to hang around Mechanicville and went to New York to work and then went to Chicago to work, as if somehow he knew that he didn't have 4 years to spend becoming a soldier, that he had what it took already, and that what he was bringing to the table was not something West Point could give him, not something they could get being a West Point graduate. Oh dear, who was the rich man next door? I'll look it up. I do have my the big pile of notes here. Anyway, he was really respected within the Army. The military officers respected him. Of course, the president respected him, and he had respect from General Scott. So he still always felt as if he had something to prove. And on the night of the 23rd, as the United States Army crossed from where they were on one side of the Potomac to Alexandria, it was a full moon. The Zouaves crossed by ship. The cavalry and artillery used the bridge, and they got to Alexandria just about midnight, May 23rd, May 24th. And it was not a surprise to Alexandria. It was from Lincoln's office with a telescope. Lincoln could see a flag, which we'll talk about later, in Alexandria, and it made him very angry, just always looking at this Confederate flag. And he knew that with Alexandria, as close as it was, they were going to have to put Alexandria under martial law. So as soon as Virginia's secession was ratified, the U.S. Army moved in. There were some Confederates who kind of shot at them on their way out, as they took the trains out. Several things were destroyed so that it wouldn't be there for the U.S. Army. But the city fathers of Alexandria knew that the U.S. Army was coming and understood why there wasn't going to be a battle of Alexandria. It was just going to be put under martial law. Which brings us to Mr. James Jackson. He is the proprietor of the Marshall House Hotel, and he is young, he's handsome, he's a hotspur. The Marshall House Hotel is not a hotel in the sense that you go and stay a couple of nights and move on about your vacation. It was a family hotel. So you rented rooms there and lived there with your family. And Jackson took care of it. And he had quite a reputation as a secessionist. And he had been out that night celebrating the state ratification of the secession of Virginia, and came home. One of the things that he did to sort of celebrate the secession effort was he had a sailmaker and his wife and a couple of kids who lived in the Marshall House. And he got them to make a flag, sort of the Stars and Bars, a version of it anyway. And it was made out of sailcloth. And every time a state seceded, they would haul down the flag and put another star on the Marshall House flag. Now, this flag is 18 feet by 24 feet. And like I said, it's made out of sailcloth. So this isn't a lovely small silk flag. This is a huge silk flag, or a huge flag, not silk, And this is the one that Lincoln can see from his office, which isn't oval yet. This is on the left is a drawing of the Marshall House flag, and you can see the arrangement of stars. And the one in the middle is for Virginia. So they waited, like with bated breath. And as soon as Virginia seceded, they whipped that star on there and raised the flag. On the right is the Marshall House flag itself. And these are the conservators at the New York State Military Museum. And what is left of the flag, as was pointed out to me when I had the honor of seeing this flag, was that there were plenty of square bullets apparently that had been shot through this flag because it had been souvenired so much. And I believe they have added a couple more stars to the flag. You can see, the reason I included that was so that you could see how absolutely huge this flag was. And like I say, sailcloth is pretty heavy. So if you have heard that Mrs. Lincoln put it in a bureau in the White House and said, I don't want to see it again, or that Tad grabbed the Marshall House flag and ran through his father's cabinet meeting with it, it is obvious that neither of those things happened. This flag is just huge and it's heavy, and it's nice to think about, but when you really look at the flag, you realize none of that happened. So right, so this happens just after the Zouaves. Elmer pulls a small group of about 11 men, maybe a few more, and he leaves the landing where they've been let off by the ships. And he and his men march down the streets of Alexandria, King Street, to cut the communication lines with Alexandria. And sure enough, he goes right by the hotel and sees the flag. And there are several different versions of what happened. My favorite is Elmer looked at the flag, took a few more steps, turned around, looked at the flag again, and said, boys, we've got to get this flag. Lincoln was his good friend. He wasn't going to allow that flag to bother Abraham Lincoln, the Union president of the United States, any longer. So he details half of his group to go ahead and take care of the telegraph lines. And then he and the other half, which were not just soldiers, you'll see in the picture later, there are newspaper reporters as well. They enter the Marshall House. Well, the first thing they see is a man, and Elmer Ellsworth says, well, where's the proprietor of this establishment? And the man says, I don't know. I just got out of bed. What are you doing here? And so Elmer Ellsworth pushes past him and starts up the stairs. The Marshall House has 3 floors, and then the top of the building you can enter from what do you call those things that you push the top up, and there you are on the stairs. Oh well, anyway, so he starts up the stairs, and as he gets to every landing, he then details one of his soldiers there, and then goes up again, details a soldier, goes up again, details a soldier, and gets to the roof of the building, and he cuts the halyards that hold up the flag and starts back down the stairs. The guy with the eye patch is a reporter, and right now I do not remember his name, but he went ahead and became pretty famous after the war as well, and starts back down. Well, on the 3rd floor, they are met by a man in a nightshirt who is holding a shotgun, double-barreled shotgun. And the first thing this man does is shoot Elmer Ellsworth right through the heart. And the second thing that happens, and we're talking about instantaneously, is Francis Brownell, the young Zouave who was in front of Elmer Ellsworth, takes his rifle with the bayonet and pushes the shotgun away, then the second shot was discharged and goes into the a doorway, and then Brownell shoots Jackson, and as Jackson falls, Brownell isn't sure that Jackson is dead, and he bayonets Jackson on the way down, as he falls down. It's a fateful trip to those stairs for all considered. And two men are lying at the foot of the stairs, their blood mingling into a huge flag. They're both dead within seconds. And these are the first two deaths of the American Civil War. So if you look at this painting, and I have, I've seen it in person, and it's just a very impressive painting. Those of you who know how to, quote, interpret paintings will see that the crossing of the guns creates a cross, and then the shining cup of Brownell's, his tin cup, that is to show the people who are looking at this that there is in fact a dead man already in that painting, and that dead man is of course Ellsworth, who is leaning up against the wall with the flag falling from his hands as he dragged it down the stairs. So what was that? Well, the North is shocked. The entire North, who has come to love Ellsworth, they all know about the 20-city tour. Ellsworth is famous, he is beloved, he's a rock star, and now he's dead. And all of the newspapers, this just happens to be Harper's Weekly, he makes the headlines, and the entire Northeast is shocked by what has happened. They are immediately shoved into mourning, as are the Lincolns. Elmer's body is brought back to the dock, goes back across to the Naval Yard. Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln come to identify the body, and Mrs. Lincoln makes a comment that he looks as if he's sleeping. The best embalmer in Washington, D.C. is called to embalm Ellsworth, and the Lincolns agree to have him lie in state in the East Room. And it's the only person other than a president who has lain in state in the Capitol building, in the president's house. Go ahead. Francis Brownell, this is a famous picture. The man who killed Ellsworth, on the left, he is standing on the flag, which was immediately folded over Ellsworth's remains. And then Brownell and a couple of other Zouaves made sure that they took care of that flag and kept it with them through all of Ellsworth's funerals, well, lying in states, actually I'd only had one funeral, and displays. They made sure that they kept that flag so that people could see it. So go ahead. This is a picture by Alfred Woad. This is the funeral in the East Room of the White House. And you can see the flag on the casket. The casket was open-faced. The casket, the top wasn't open. It has a glass that goes over where the face is, and you can see the person through the glass. That was the kind of casket he had. And Mrs. Lincoln again said he looks as though he's sleeping, and Abraham Lincoln and Mrs. Lincoln were just in tears most of the time. Anybody who was anybody was at the funeral, including Winfield Scott, who was was actually very emotional, even though he wasn't a really good friend of Ellsworth. It's even said that when Robert E. Lee heard that Ellsworth had died, even though Robert E. Lee was sort of nobody at that point, said, and still working for the United States, of course, I think, maybe not. He said he thought that he would have become the leader, the top general in the Union at that point. Something I would argue with, although that's all for another time. So, all right. At this point, then, as soon as he has lain in state in the East Room, his remains are taken on the train to New York City. He lies in state in the Astor House. He lies in state at City Hall. And then he is, and you can see the Zouaves with him. They did not leave his body at any time while the body was in transition from point A to point B. They took a boat up the Hudson, a funeral barge up the Hudson, and he got off at Albany and was taken on a train across to Mechanicville. Like I say, the entire Northeast was just stunned that they had lost Ellsworth. Go ahead. These are examples of memento mori. And in case there are some Confederates out there, I thought I'd make sure that I also put in the one that was the postcard and the envelope that's referred to him as the housebreaker and thief. My argument is that if you're under martial law, you've got to do what the commanding officers tell you. But he wasn't always seen that way. There are plenty who say that Jackson was the first death in the for the Union, so, or for the Confederacy. So go ahead. These were funeral dirges that were just cranked out really quickly. Sadly, the bells told the death of the hero and a funeral march. And those, there were many, many more that memorialized Ellsworth. The one on the right is an actual cockade worn. It's a mourning cockade. The one on the left is on a piece of wood, and someone brought it. It said that Mrs. Lincoln brought it, but I can't find any proof of that. But that was placed on the casket while it was in the East Room. So there's some examples of memento mori there. This is from the Military Museum in New York, and you can see the hole in Ellsworth's dress uniform there. There's a story about that uniform. Jack Wildey was Elmer Ellsworth's aide-de-camp. And Elmer Ellsworth was very superstitious, and he had on a uniform, and he said to Jack Wildey about, the middle of the night, he said, I don't think I want to be killed in this uniform. I'm going to wear my new one. And so Wildey helps him get into his brand new uniform, and right over his heart is a badge that says, "For the country alone," and it had been given to him by one of the firefighting companies. You can see from where this hole is, he died immediately, and that badge has never been refound. I guess it was just vaporized, but there weren't any pieces of it enough to put it back together to make a reproduction of it. Also, you'll notice that there's no blood on it. Some willing volunteer decided she didn't want to have to deal with a blood-stained uniform, so she sneaked it out of the museum and had it cleaned. So There we are. Not a good thing to do. This is from Fort Ward, Ellsworth's iconic red kepi. And this brought tears to my eyes when I saw it. I've seen so many pictures of him, drawings of him with that red kepi. And to me, that's just the quintessential Ellsworth accoutrement. And to actually see it was, just very moving for me. It's in Fort Ward in Alexandria. And it says compliments of Frankie Brownell. It's a piece of the Marshall House flag. Now, after all this was, after Ellsworth was buried, they took the flag back with them and kept it. And his wife sold autographed souvenir pieces of the Marshall House flag for a while to pay the rent, because Frank had to go back, get himself back into the army, and fight a war. She wasn't making a lot of money there, so this sort of added to the household income. So, boy, what wouldn't I give to have one of those, even though I'm completely against doing anything like that. So I wish. Oh well. And in John Hay's obituary, which is in the Ellsworth book, he said so many beautiful things about his friend Ellsworth. You really, when you read that obituary, you really realize how tight Hay and Nicolay and Ellsworth were, that they had worked to get their friend Lincoln elected. They had protected their friend Lincoln all the way across from Springfield to Washington. They had done everything they could to, protect their man and make his presidency successful. And then suddenly Ellsworth is gone. It says, to his friends, he always seemed like a paladin or cavalier of the dead days of romance and beauty. One of the most famous letters that Lincoln wrote was the one that it's a letter of condolence. He wrote it to Colonel Ellsworth's parents. And it's just beautiful. It's here in California. And I don't remember what museum it's at, but it's in Southern California. Huntington, thank you. And it's just beautiful. This is his grave in Hudson View Cemetery, and all of the wreaths are from the sesquicentennial. They sort of the Civil War interpreters reinterpreted his internment. It's a lot of turning in there, but anyway, there were ceremonies held at his grave site, and but when I went there, they were gone. And it's the next one. It looked more like that. And the cemetery was very quiet. And we turned off the car, and I just stood there and looked at it, tears streaming down my face. And something that, living in California, we don't hear cicadas very often. But you could hear the cicadas in the background, because I went up during the summer. And I thought, that's who constantly sings Ellsworth's Requiem, are the cicadas there. So it was a very, very moving. And then he had written letters to his parents, and the one that he wrote to his mom and dad ended, "He who noteth even the fall of a sparrow will have some purpose, even in the fate of one like me." And when Ellsworth's body was searched, they found the letters to his parents. He had put them in his jacket pocket. And so his parents were able to get his last letters. So that is Colonel Ellsworth. The trickle of blood that was Ellsworth's, within 6 weeks became a torrent. July 21st, at first full run, the Union lost that fight. The 11th New York was cut to ribbons, not from poor leadership on anybody with the 11th New York, but just from confusion during the battle. McDowell did what he could. He said, "My men are green," but no one listened. And at that point, the Civil War, as most people think of it, starts with the horrible fields of dead bodies and sadness, and the people who had mourned Ellsworth suddenly were finding that they were mourning sons of their own. So that's kind of where the book ends. There are appendices, and it tells what happened with each one of the people involved in Ellsworth's life. So if you have questions, I'm going to flip through my notes here and see if I can find the gentleman that
Thank you so much, Ms. Groeling. That was fantastic. We've got,
my pleasure.
yeah, we enjoyed it so much. We've got some questions already in the chat box, but you go ahead and be looking for that because I've got a couple of other things that I have to do.
Okay.
And one of them, of course, before we get started with the question and the answer, is just to remind you that if you do have a question, go ahead and enter it in the chat box. Or if you prefer to ask your question live, go ahead and raise your hand using the reaction feature, or you can just pop a note in the chat box and tell us that you want to ask a question, and we'll call on you when it's time. One of the moderators will communicate with you to let you know the order that we're going to go in. But before we get to those questions, we would like to remind you that all of our presentations for Civil War Talk Presents are provided by our wonderful authors and historians without compensation. And so we encourage everyone to purchase your own copy of First Following the Life of Colonel Elmer Ellsworth, the North's first Civil War hero, and to let you know that our friends at Zouave Beatty would like to thank everyone or appreciate you by providing a 20% discount. And of course, we put a little Christmas tree here just to remind you that you can do all your Christmas shopping at Zouave Beatty, and you can get 20% off of everything that you add to your cart. So use the link savasbeatty.com/ref equals Civil War Talk and enter the code that Tina's going to type into the chat box. Be sure to use all caps when you enter the code, and you will receive 20% off of every single thing that you put into your cart. I don't think there are many exclusions, maybe some of the series and reprints and things like that, but most every book that we feature here, you can purchase with 20% off. And so with all of that said, be sure to check out that code, and we will turn it over to Tina so that she can tell us about the benefits of membership at Civil War Talk.
Well, thank you, Laura, and thank you so much, Ms. Groeling. This was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Anyway, over in Civil War Talk, there is great content, and it's free to join. We encourage you to join tonight. And if you pay the premium rate of $12 a year, you don't have to bother with the pesky Google ads. And right now, what's hot on Civil War Talk is there's some threads going. There's a great relic on the homepage. I don't want to tell anybody what it is. It is a fantastic relic. They hardly ever survive. It's there, so go look. And we have a couple of threads of George Custer and the Confederate wedding, and George Custer, Give the Boys Dixie. And so we hope to whet your interest and get you over to Civil War Talk and have you join tonight. And thank you, Laura. Back to you.
Thanks. I didn't know my thread was on the front page. How about that? George Custer, Give the Boys Dixie. That was my thread. You guys go check it out. You'll like it. It's a good one. So we do have questions in the chat log that we want to get to. And I hope that you're ready, Ms. Groeling, because I don't know the answers to these questions.
I'm certainly ready. I can't find the name of the neighbors that they had in Mechanicville, but I will certainly find it and make sure that you get that information.
Right,
That's something
absolutely. That'd be great.
I
And
said,
just,
was my first time giving this, and I'm thinking, oh, why didn't I write that down? So
you did fantastic. We enjoyed it very much. The pictures that you used are fantastic, and I enjoyed seeing all the pictures. And I'm sure everybody else did too. Let's see, I'm gonna run through the questions that are in the chat box and try to do them in order, but Mr. Gates asked first. He had been there several years ago, maybe 10, and he was wondering if any additional plaques or notations of the event had been added. The last time he was there was one by the daughter UDC, and he was wondering if a new one had been added to commemorate the death of Ellsworth at that location.
this is at the Alexandria Hotel, or the hotel.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, that's all right. Actually, I just stayed there last time I was in Alexandria. 3 years ago, the hotel was taken over by a bigger hotel chain, and it's still very nice and everything, very historic, but they removed that plaque that says, well, it doesn't say anything at all about Elmer Ellsworth. It says that here on this spot, James Jackson died, defending his property. And they removed that, returned it to the United Daughters of the Confederacy. Nothing has been put in that place yet. There is a kiosk not too far away that does kind of your usual state park interpretation, with the drawing and then the little explanation of what happened. But, along with getting rid of statues and everything else, that was one that was that went. I saw it. I have photographs of it, and it was kind of, gee, could they have said, at least who killed Jackson? One of the things I found not challenging, but that I very much wanted to do was to be very fair to James Jackson in my book. I don't agree with James Jackson politically, but he certainly did what he thought was the right thing to do, and didn't weenie out in any way. He had his flag up there and he stood for what he stood for. And there have been rumors, I guess you'd call them historiography, it's kind of hazy, that things had happened to his remains. Well, that's not true. He had 2 little daughters and a wife, and when his remains were removed from the Marshall House, they were removed to a cemetery that was on his mother's property, and he's buried there. And the caretakers have always done a lovely job taking care of Jackson's grave.
Okay, let's see. The next question is, someone wants to know, I think it's Mr. DeMar. He asked, how did you get involved with emerging Civil War? And also, he enjoyed your Walt Whitman series weekly very much. And this is your Walt Whitman U.S. postage stamp friend, he says. So how did you?
Oh,
how did you?
yay! It just
How did you get involved with emerging Civil War?
Yes, well, I got a copy of the artwork on the stamp, and then there was a little stamp from the post office itself, and sent it off to Chris Mikowski for a Christmas present. So just went out yesterday. This was 2011 when I started. And if you think back to then, you guys were around, but very few Civil War blogs and things like that were around. The 125th, there hadn't been that much going on for as far as technology goes. And so I'm just looking through, and I found this emerging Civil War. And Walt Whitman again, they were interviewing someone who had written a Whitman biography. And I think they had 2 or 3 blog posts about it. And then it said how to get in touch with them. And then there was a little box. And so into the little box, I put Colonel Elmer Ellsworth, and nothing came up. And So, you know how sometimes you don't know how little you know or how much you know. So,
All the time.
yeah, you know,
All the time. I don't realize how little I know.
well, so I said, get in touch with the emerging Civil War. So I said, hi, at that time I was Meg Thompson. I'm Meg Thompson, and I see you don't have anything about Elmer Ellsworth. Would you like me to write something? Oh, because I didn't know any better. And the first thing I wrote was about Elmer Ellsworth's measles. I think it's called The Curious Case of the Measles. And then I wrote 3 or 4 more blog posts, and then they asked me to write regularly. And I have written well over 300 blog posts since then. So
what a great story. Thank you for telling us that. That's great.
It's like, oh, it's this woman in California, but they always laugh, they didn't expect to get someone as old as their grandmother. They thought they were going to get, people in college, but oh well,
It's great. Let's see, Kathy's commented on Colonel Elmsworth's appearance. She says he's quite handsome, and you mentioned that he got some ribbing or kidding about that. Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, he I did find that the Calico Colonels here. Let's see, signed his bar acceptance. Ellsworth was very good looking, and Lincoln said he was the biggest little man he knew. He trying to I should have marked that. Anyway,
was he shorter than average? I remember that you said he was in
5'6" is an average height, but he's very slight. When there's one where he was called a pet of the family by the Ellsworths, or the Lincolns.
Mhm.
Trying to find it here. I think that because he was so handsome, people just sort of thought, he might not be worth very much. I'm not finding it, and I just found
That's
it.
okay. I was just curious about a little bit more about his appearance. Like he was 5'6" and weighed about 130 or 45 pounds, and brown eyes, blue eyes,
hazel eyes. And it said that his eyes, he had beautiful eyes. He had really strong flashing eyes, and that when he was giving orders, he had a voice that he could really project over the whole field, so that no matter where you were, you could hear orders being given. He was very charismatic. One of the things that made me think to myself, having been a school teacher and having taught in what we in California call Title I schools, which have a certain number of students below the poverty level, I've worked with kids at that level all my life, all my teaching life. And I would read about Ellsworth, and I was thinking, he just couldn't be that poor. He couldn't present himself that well. He couldn't be that experienced. This can't be right. Well, it wasn't until I started looking that for some reason he felt that he needed that to be part of his mystique, was that he was a poor, impoverished little thing. But the truth was he wasn't, and he was very well brought up, very well bred, I guess you would say at that time, and impressed everybody from the governor of Illinois to the future president of the United States.
That was actually one of the questions that I think Tina asked about why did he make up lies about his childhood, telling the stories that he was incredibly poor and that the Ellsworth family was incredibly destitute or nearly destitute.
I don't know. And when he would meet people, he depending on, oh, this is hard to say, depending on what he wanted from those people, he would either use that or not. For instance, when he was drilling the Springfield Grays in Rockview Grays, he met Carrie Spafford, and she was 16 at the time. And he fell head over heels in love with her and decided that he wanted to marry her. Her father was a banker. The Spafford house still at, in this day and age is a absolutely lovely brick mansion. And so he wasn't about to go in there and try to say to Carrie Spafford's father, hi, I have no background, I have no money, I'm just a jerk. I don't know nothing about nothing, but I want to marry your daughter. That was not going to work. So he presented himself in the absolute best light that he could. Someone who was just in one of the emerging Civil War blogs, Arthur Devereaux. Arthur Devereaux dropped out of Harvard to come to Chicago as a self-made man. And he was so impressed with Elmer Ellsworth, who came to Devereaux's office because he had invented a clip that would hold the train window up so you wouldn't get train smuts all over yourself, and offered Ellsworth a job, a part in the business, basically. And he maintained friendship with Arthur Devereaux, who went on to become a commander of I believe, the 19th Massachusetts. And, he was a war Democrat, actually. But, he just didn't have any trouble meeting and greeting and being accepted at the highest levels. And yet he would tell John, hey, these lies, the best explanation that I can see is that where they lived was very close to Ballston Spa and what's the place in New York with all the horses?
Saratoga.
So those were places where people from the South and well-to-do people from the middle states came up to stay because the weather was so lovely. And he saw these beautiful equipage, I think that's the right term, beautiful horses, beautiful carriages, servants in livery. And I think that's what he thought regular people were. And because that wasn't what he was, he may have thought, oh, well, we're horribly poor. And that's he was just a little guy then. So that may have stuck with him.
May have been. Mr. Carlson mentioned that he was in awe to be able to examine the coat in the museum. And the shotgun must have fired a slug rather than birdshot. I would guess either that or it was so close that it made a hole rather than a scatter pattern.
I think they were slugs, because the one in the door frame is also not a scatter pattern. It's a direct hit on that door frame, and then just little pieces of splinters from around that. So I think you're absolutely right about that. So did you actually get to touch it or just see it?
Did you get to touch it, Robert? Or just see it? No, he shook his head no. Your audio is still messed up, Robert.
I love it.
Robert, your audio is still messed up. Your audio is still messed up. You've got the yeah. Oh my gosh. But he said no, he didn't get to touch it. He shook his head. So
I know that was, when you write a biography, and I don't know if other biographers do this, but these are your guys. They're your friends. They're people you love, people you care about. I mean, I would see things like that. I I get pretty emotional about things. I noticed we had somebody here from Wisconsin, and one of the most delightful weeks I ever spent was in the Kenosha Civil War Museum in Wisconsin. And Dan Damon and everybody there is so incredible. And they opened up boxes for me that had not been opened since the 30s, you know, or the 1960s, the last biography. Well, the only biography of Ellsworth was written in it was published in 1960. And there was a scrapbook, and it belonged to Elmer Ellsworth's fiance, who was not able to attend any of his funerals. She went to school in New York City, was home for the summer, broke her ankle or her foot, and couldn't travel.
Mm.
So people sent her newspaper clippings, and she used up, you know, mucilage is, you know, and old mucilage cracks, you know. So there were these newspaper clippings describing the funerals and the lying in state and the this and the that, what everyone was dressed in. And they were put together almost like a jigsaw puzzle. They were very close together, not just one newspaper clipping and then a big sheet. They were very close together. And I'm sitting there, you know, with my white gloves on and looking through. And all of a sudden I came to the one that described him lying in state in the Astor House. And it described the flowers that had been sent. And sure enough, right there between the two pages were clippings of the flowers and the greenery from his funeral. And I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now. I just thought, how long has it been since anybody saw this, since anybody realized how much Carrie, you know, his fiance would have cared or put this together for him or anything. It was quite moving. I called one of the historians over, and she and I both got kind of teary about the whole thing. But it was quite a moving experience. When you do research, you have them on a regular basis, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Miss Springhorn said, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm sure Elmer Ellsworth would have gone on to do great things.
I think he would have. My personal opinion is that the combination of the Zouave drill, he wrote another drill manual. He never stopped working. He wrote another drill manual. It combined Scott Hardy and the Zouave drill, and he trained, you know, his Chicago Zouave cadets to do things that you just didn't really see being done by the Army, like the 3-man firing, where one man is prone and he's your sharpshooter, and he fires, reaches, you know, hands the gun back, gets the other gun, fires, you know, fires. So he's firing constantly. And the 2 men in back of him are loading those guns, you know, handing it off to people like that, so that it's a constant fire. And one thing that I haven't figured out how to put it in here yet, but if you look up on YouTube, the Zouaves, there are pictures from, I'm going to guess the 1930s, maybe a little earlier, where the moving pictures were still jerky, you know, and you kind of laugh at them. And there's a touring Zouave company, and they've had a movie taken of their performance, and they're very small. There might be 20 men, and it's on this little funny stage. And they get to the end of their performance, and from the side of the stage, they pick up a wall, and then they start from the bottom of the wall and they get on top of each other and they get to the top of the wall and then they start pulling each other up over the wall until within a matter of, I would say minutes, but actually probably seconds, he has the whole group over the wall. And I had read about this and found that, and I don't know how to smooth out the action. And I certainly didn't want to show something that might make people laugh. Because also, if you look, Laurel and Hardy did some Zouave comedy things. There's Buster Keaton did some Zouave comedy things. And then I thought, well, there's got to be something that proves my point. So I looked up the Navy SEALs, and it shows them in doing SEAL training. And that's exactly what they're doing. It's exactly what they're doing. They're getting up over that wall.
I've got a live question. It's not actually a question, but I'm going to bring my friend Nick to the stage, and he is going to show you something. And I bet, I'm just guessing, I bet is going to blow us away. I'm just going to take a shot.
I hope so.
Well, Ms. Groeling, thank you very much for a fascinating presentation this evening. There's something in my collection I thought you and the viewers may like to see. I had never seen one like it. It comes from a lieutenant in the 1st Maine who was in Alexandria in April, May, and June of 1861. He goes in the Marshall Hotel and he takes this piece of wallpaper off the wall.
Oh,
this is wallpaper from the wall where in the hotel where Elmer Ellsworth was killed. So I thought, I guess you can all see that. And then on the back, he identifies it, because I think you probably see it in reverse.
oh,
But he writes,
I know.
a piece of paper torn from the wall of the Marshall House, Alexandria, Virginia, 1861.
Oh, that's just amazing.
Thank you so much, Nick, for sharing that.
That is wonderful.
I'm glad you enjoyed seeing. I want to add one other thing. In my collection, there is a early salt print photograph of a lieutenant in the Chicago Zouaves by the name of Menzies Fessenden. He would later serve in the 1st Maine along with the lieutenant who tore the paper. Fessenden, who served with Ellsworth in the Chicago Zouaves, was the cousin of William Pitt Fessenden, who cast a vote against impeaching Andrew Johnson in 1866, I guess it was, or 67. But Menzies Fessenden would later enter the 12th Maine in later 1861 and die as a result of chronic alcoholism in 1862.
Oh.
So I just thought I would add those little tidbits of information. So I'm glad you all enjoyed seeing the piece of wallpaper from the hotel.
We did. Thank you so much, Nick.
That's
I really
wonderful.
appreciate you messaging me and coming on
And
the screen to show it to us.
The Chicago Zouave cadets were made up of the cream of the crop of the young men of Chicago. It's a whole other, talk about young, the idea of the Union self-made man. But so many of them did not want to stay on the farm, did not want to, do the same kind of work their fathers had done. And they went to towns. That's what grew San Francisco. That's what grew New York. That's what grew Chicago. And they, from the YMCA to, you had to buy a beer, but they'd give you lunch at the bar, so that they could get food. And if you had room and board, that meant that you paid a little extra and you could also eat. So all of those things that, you don't even think of as being important, they didn't exist. Boys, people stayed home, and ate with mom, and mom made clothes, or they made clothes, and then your wife made the clothes, your wife made her clothes, and that kind of stuff. And there, it was the ready-to-wear industry came out of that so much that we think of when we think of Yankee ingenuity. comes right out of that idea of a self-made man. You know, that's just incredible to me.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that, Nick. That was great. We're going to have to get you on one week and do nothing but pictures and relics. Is that a yes? I saw you raise your eyebrows. That was a yes, wasn't it?
It'll be, it's all non-Doug relics. It's all uniform swords and I've got 18,000 items to choose from. So
wow.
I'm sure you can keep us in.
All from one regiment.
That's great.
Wow.
All right, I'm going to pull the spotlight off of you, Nick, for right now while you contemplate a date. Isn't he great? He's fantastic, isn't he? So thanks so much, Nick. That was great. We've got I think one more thing I need to say before people log out, and that is I have an inside source here who sent me a message and said the book, First Fall in the Life of Colonel Elmer Ellsworth, the North's first Civil War hero, by Meg Groeling, will ship by the end of the month.
Yay, I'm so glad.
So that's great news, right?
Yes.
Then the other question is someone, you mentioned that Ellsworth was superstitious. Do you think he had a premonition of his death?
He did. I believe that very, very thoroughly. He wrote to his parents. Well, first of all, he said to Jack Wildey, you know, I want to be killed in my best clothes. And Wildey saying, oh, you know, Elmer, come on, you know, you're going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. We're not even expecting to fire guns. You know, I want to do this. And then he wrote basically a farewell letter to his parents and a farewell letter to his fiance as well. And those were found later. And I very much think he had a premonition about dying early in the war, which is one of the reasons I think that he didn't go to West Point. I think he knew all along it was going to be short and sweet. But you know, he chose not to go to West Point. So there's several examples of things like that that make him kind of unusual. It's the kind of thing that when you start talking with people about it, then they start thinking, well, you know, you're just crazy. I
think everybody gets a little, Mr. Carlson even mentioned, when you're doing research and you find something like that, you just, it's I don't know, a emotional response, I think. So, and Mr. Carlson said the same thing. Well, we certainly appreciate you being here with us tonight. Thank you so much for answering the questions for the presentation and for answering the questions.
Well, there was one other thing, and somebody had asked a question about Brownell and kind of what happened to him. He made it through the war, and his act of killing Jackson, although he was not the first man to receive the Medal of Honor, his act was the first act of the Civil War considered worthy of a Medal of Honor. And he is a Medal of Honor recipient.
Oh, great. Thanks for adding that. So of course we encourage you to purchase the book. And like I said, I just got word from an inside source that you can count on it. you can count on this source. That the book will ship by the end of the month. And you can purchase it for yourself, or I had this great idea. You could take the cover, wrap it up in a box, give it to someone for Christmas, just the cover, you know, just print it out and put it in a box, and then they'll know what they're getting, right? And when the book ships, you'll have it. I think it's a great idea. And of course, you can order all of your Christmas gifts through Savaspady's website, savaspady.com/ref equals Civil War Talk will get you the 20% discount. Use the code, get 20% off of everything, including Miss Groeling's previous book, which is also published by Savaspady, called The Aftermath of Battle, the Burial of the Civil War Dead. And you can receive 20% off of it as well when you add it to your cart at the Savaspady website. And I'm not sure if that's a good Christmas gift, but it would be for me. I would love to get that for Christmas.
Well, I was going to say, it's not just people dying and getting buried. It talks about, actually, it starts out with Ellsworth, but it goes all the way to the last veteran of the Civil War who died, and General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower then wrote his obituary. Talks about taps, it talks about horses and mules. It's just, you know, I try to think of what else happened at the end of battles.
Right. A few weeks ago, our guest was Dr. Alexander Racino on his brand new book, There, Maryland, the Army of Northern Virginia from the Potomac Crossing to Sharpsburg in September of 1862. That was a fascinating presentation. If you haven't ordered the book yet, you can still purchase it and receive the 20% discount by using this link and the code that Tina typed into the chat. The book just was released, like I think maybe they unboxed it 3 weeks ago. So be sure to get yours ordered. And again, many thanks to Ms. Groeling for such an informative and enjoyable presentation. I hope everyone will join us next week when our guest is, I think it's me. I think I'm going to be the guest next week. I'll be here on December 15th with you. That is almost the anniversary of the event that we'll be talking about, which is the Angel of Marie's Heights in Historiography and Memory. And of course, we'll be exploring the legacy of Richard Growling Kirkland of the 2nd South Carolina, who earned the moniker the Angel of Marie's Heights. We'll be taking a break for Christmas for a couple of weeks, but we'll be back on January 5th. When we will feature Dr. Brian Steele Wills on 2 of his latest books, Inglorious Passages, Non-Combat Deaths in the American Civil War, and his latest, the biography of Confederate General William Dorsey Pender, The Hope of Glory. And we're looking very forward to having Dr. Wills here with us. On January 12th, it'll be Craig Swain. You probably know him best as the author of that blog that you go to all the time called To the Sound of the Guns. And Craig will be here to talk about field artillery tactics of the Civil War. We're very much looking forward to have him and hear that presentation. You don't want to miss that one. And I hope you'll be here and join me on December 15th for the Angel of Marie's Heights in Historiography and Memory. Thanks for joining us tonight. And thank you so much, Ms. Groeling. We enjoyed having you, and happy holidays to all. I hope to see you next week at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. See you then.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too.